Welcome to the 2021 AMO conference panel discussion called Understanding the Role of Elected Officials in Asset Management. So my name is Christina Benty from Strategic Leadership Solutions, and I'm going to be your host today. So I like to describe myself as an asset management evangelist. I am a researcher, a speaker, and a facilitator, but more importantly, I've been an elected official. So I understand the role of elected officials in asset management. So I'm very excited to be hosting this panel discussion today about what's your role and why does it matter? So today we're going to be exploring the role of elected officials as stewards of public infrastructure, as strategic direction setters, as long-term thinkers, and as advocates out in the community of all the services that you provide for your community. So my intention today in this conversation, and for those of you who are listening, is that you leave with a commitment to be a good ancestor, to use asset management as a decision-making tool from a philosophical perspective that's going to leave future generations in a good position rather than a scary one. So that's what we're going to be digging in today. So before I invite the panel up to speak, I want to quickly review some asset management principles. And here's the thing that's interesting about asset management. It's actually quite, in many ways, the principles themselves are quite simple. And that's why they're often overlooked. Now, simple is not to be confused with easy. So I want you to think about it like this. We're all asset managers. So in our personal lives, we have assets that provide services. You may own a house and a bike and a coffee machine and a lawnmower, a snowblower, right down to your silverware and your cups. Those are all assets, and all of those assets provide a service in your home. So if you are the adult in your home, and I assume that you are not only a user, you are also responsible for those assets, for the stewardship of those assets, so that they provide the service that you want and that they last as long as you need them to last. It's why we don't put orange juice in our car. It's why we put gasoline in our car, or we plug it in. We plug in our electric cars. So if you are an elected official, you are also a user, right, of municipal services, and you have a stewardship responsibility over the services and the assets that provide those services. So if you, all of your services that you provide, they require assets, right? Assets such as pump stations and sewage treatment plants and pipes under the ground, right down to snow plows and garbage trucks and facilities and roads and all of the assets that are required to deliver services. And here's the crux: if you build it, you gotta look after it. And really, that's what asset management is about. And so in terms of the principles of asset management, this is going to sound like common sense, because it is. First of all, it starts with the question: what services do we provide? Oftentimes when I'm working with elected officials, one of the first things we do is we list out all the services that your organization delivers and that you have that governance and stewardship responsibility for. So first of all, you got to know, what are the services we provide? And then you have to ask yourself, why do we even provide these services, right? Every service, you should be asking yourself, why do we provide this? And get super clear on the why. That's key. And then what are the assets that provide the services? What are the assets that we own that provide the service? And then where are they? Right? So that's your inventory. interestingly enough, that seems like an obvious question, but there may be assets in your house that you actually don't know where they are. And in some small communities, actually in large ones as well, that we have lots of assets and we actually don't know where they all are. So it starts off with the basic principle of knowing what your assets, what assets you have and where they're located. And then what condition are they in, right? Do you know what condition they're in? And you can look at it from an age-based condition assessment. That may not get, that'll give you some information, but you also want the true data from the asset itself so that you know what condition that asset's in. Another principle of asset management is what's its remaining life. What's each of your assets will have an estimated remaining life. So you need to know what needs to be fixed and when. What is it going to cost? What is the risk of doing too little or doing nothing? Because there is a risk. And so part of asset management is understanding what are what's the consequence of failure and what is the risk of failure. So that's part of your condition assessment, but it's all based on those risk conversations and knowing the state of your assets. And then when do we replace the asset? Are we spending enough on maintenance to extend the life of the asset, or are we allowing it to deteriorate accidentally and only being reactive when an asset falls apart? So one of the questions, again, principles of asset management is, are we spending enough on our assets? And here's the other key question, and that is, can we afford our current service level? Because maybe we have service levels that we actually can't afford in our community, particularly over the long term. So the role of elected officials in that questions that elected officials need to consider is, what does our community want and need now and into the future, and at what level? And then question number 2, which is equally important, what are we willing and able to pay for? And that's the question that as elected officials that you need to grapple with. And this comes back to the fact, if you're going to build it, then you have to look after it. So these sound like basic common sense principles. And so you may be nodding your head while you're listening to this. And but let's talk about what gets in the way, because clearly something has gotten in the way, because a third of our assets right across the country are in poor to very poor condition. And we actually don't have enough money to replace our assets at the rate that they're wearing out. So what gets in the way, right? I'd love to get into the brain science of that, but I won't. That'll be for another discussion. But the importance of recognizing that these assets, so it's, one of the things that gets in the way is time and age. We've built these assets so long ago that we actually have forgotten about them. We don't think about them. Nobody thinks about when they turn on the tap, whether they're going to, most communities, right, across the countries, not all, most communities turn on the tap and they don't think about whether they get clean, clear, safe drinking water. That's an assumption, and we take those things for granted. So we have a tendency to forget about them, and we forget to link, here's we can deliver this service, but here's the cost to provide the service. The other thing that gets in the way is standards have actually changed. The legislative environment has changed significantly, which means that it impacts the cost, it impacts the staffing levels. You need way more information now when you go to replace an asset or you deliver a service. There's safety requirements and engineering requirements, and there's a number of legislative changes that took place. It used to be that if you wanted a community pool, your community got together, say in the 1950s, and they just built themselves a pool. But now there's issues that standards have changed. The other thing that has also gotten in the way is community expectations. Our communities, and I'm sure the mayors here could probably say the same, is our communities have very high expectations. They want high levels of service, but their willingness to pay is a little bit lower, right? And so there's some resistance around that. Expectations have changed in a very short period of time, and they have increased. And our fee structures have not kept pace with the rate that our assets are wearing out. So it's a bit of a perfect storm right now. And it's partly because we have failed to fully count the cost for the assets and services. Our assets are getting timed out and tapped out at the moment. So this current storm has fallen on our current elected officials. You may not have asked for it, but you've got it. You've inherited the assets and services and the life that we all enjoy. And your responsibility as elected officials is to turn the tide of underinvestment in our existing infrastructure and services, and to really shun that short-term thinking that actually got us into the position, and stop kicking the can further down the road. And so the invitation in this conversation is we're going to be talking about how do you be a good ancestor as a decision maker. And what I want you to leave with is the sense that asset management is actually not a plan. It's actually a philosophical lens through which all of your decisions should be made. And if everyone can leave with that sense of that philosophical lens, we'll have done it. We'll be proud. We'll be patting ourselves on the back, and we'll be super proud of this conversation. So I have with me today, we have three mayors from different communities in Ontario. We have Mayor Nancy Peckford, we have Mayor Cheryl Fort, and we have Mayor Brad Loosley. And we're going to be digging into a discussion about the role of elected officials. So I want to start off with the question, first of all, tell us about your municipality and how asset management, how is that philosophical lens important when it comes to service delivery in your community? And so maybe I will start with Mayor Cheryl Fort. If I can invite you to unmute and introduce yourself and take it away.
Well, thank you, Christina. It's great to be here with everyone today. And for those that do take this session in, I think you're in the right spot for building your community and what you need to do. So Hornepayne is the geographical center of Ontario, and we're in Northern Ontario. And we build where our location is strategic because we're really between the west and the east of Northern Ontario as well. And we have many contacts and our network is wide. So this council, and this is my first term as mayor, I was on council previous, but this current council right off the hop understood what Christina was talking about, understanding your services. So we did a service delivery review of our entire municipality, of everything we offer. It was extensive. We got over 100 recommendations for change, right from looking at our infrastructure to organizational structure. So it was a great place to start. And the one part that I wanted to just mention too about what you inherited, and the way I look at it when we have this new mindset of looking for generations ahead is I want to leave a better inheritance for the next council. I'm not always going to be mayor, and I always want to leave it better than what I received. And I think that's an imperative point when we're talking about changing the way we look at it, is although we may only be here for a 4-year term, or maybe you'll do consecutive terms, but you always want to remember that what you're doing is going to be carried on to the future for the future generations of your residents. So I'm happy to be here. I'm glad to kick it off. Thank you for having me. And I'm glad to be joined by the other two mayors as well. So
fantastic, thank you. And what a good start, right? To come into your time in office, having a really full understanding of what are the services we provide and what level do we provide them at. Yeah, and one of the things after we've later on in the discussion, I'd love to dig into how do you articulate that in your community so that your community is linking those services to the cost, and that there is a social there's a social, economic, lifestyle benefit to those services. So we'll dig into that later. Thank you. So Mayor Brad Loosley, how about yourself? Do you want to introduce yourself? And
Sure will. Thank you, Christina. And again, it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for asking me to take part. And I certainly enjoyed what Cheryl had to say. I think that's really important. The idea of we're only here for a short time and what we do basically affects the future. Now, Petrolia is a small town in southwestern Ontario. We just hit 6,000 people. We're kind of proud of that. We are a municipality that has all the services of a large center regarding sewage treatment. We have our own water treatment plant. We have fire. We have all these services as a large center, and we're very, very proud of that. However, there is a cost for all of that, as you know. But I do want to mention, we understand here too that municipal government is the closest to the people. I mean, I sit on county council, nobody attends. If there's an issue in your municipality, everybody's attending. But our council and staff provide many critical services, as you know, everything from safe drinking water, fire protection, sanitary, stormwater, culture, many other services. And again, asset management is really about service management in the short term or proper management of those assets and long-term replacement of old deteriorated assets. Asset management to me is about being proactive or improve the long-term planning rather than reactive. And I could give you an example of the worst snowstorm we ever get. We have one snow plow, it breaks down. What do? And even worse scenario, it takes 2 or 3 weeks to get the part. So the idea is don't wait for things to break down, to take that and look at the future so you can plan for that. The interesting for us is I found in Petrolia, we have $300 million in assets, which works out to roughly $125,000 per household. And again, it's really important that council, and again, I repeat, that council understand that type of thing. And I just want to finish too, I'm quite proud of the fact I've been a clerk, an administrator clerk, CAO. I've been just about everything. So I've been on both sides of the fence, and I really have an understanding of how difficult that is. But anyway, that's my start. Thank you, Christina.
awesome. Thank you. Thank you very much. That's fantastic. Mayor Nancy Peckford.
Yes, well, like Mayor Fort, this is my first term as a mayor, but in fact, myself and none of my colleagues had never served on municipal council. So this community chose to elect 5 brand new people. So certainly asset management as a tool was of significant interest to us, not only to improve our knowledge base on municipal assets and where things stood, but also because we were in part elected because the community felt that we were growing really quickly. We're 18,000 people south of Ottawa, just on the boundary with Ottawa, but we are overwhelmingly rural with an urban hub. And we are seeing a lot of growth in some urban areas and in sort of outlying urban rural areas, but the community wasn't seeing a lot of investment. So despite the fact that there was all this growth, despite the fact that we have development charges, a lot of the growth wasn't reaping a quality of life benefit for North Grenville. In fact, it was stressing the community in a variety of different ways. So really, overwhelmingly, our mandate was to find ways to invest, to actually look at some of the assets that one could argue had been neglected or in fact hadn't enjoyed any benefit alongside the growth, and figure out how we could do long-term planning. So, over a 3-year period, we developed a Parks and Rec master plan, and part of that master planning exercise was to reconcile the condition of those assets within Parks and Rec with the kind of investments the community's been calling for. And that has led us to a historic $1.5 million investment in our central park, because communities are about gathering spaces, and a community that's radically changing, which is welcoming hundreds of new people a year, needs gathering spaces. So I see asset management really as a tool in creating community cohesion. Because if you're relying almost exclusively on the private sector to invest, through development, or if you're relying on grants, external grants only to invest, it may not carry us through in the long run. And we had extremely frustrated community who felt that there was a kind of fragmentation that was happening through growth that was not bringing people together. So, as a consequence, there had been some good asset management foundation being built prior to our election. So we'd already gone down the path. So our municipality was on the way to being able to describe to council what were the trade-offs. If we spent money here, where couldn't we spend it somewhere else? And really, that's been, I think, the process in which we've been engaged. We have a new director of finance now who brings even more asset management knowledge. We have a dedicated asset management staff person, and the quantification of sort of end of life, right? What's the cost? What do we think it's 10 years down the road? All of that is currently in play. But quite frankly, what I think asset management enables us to do as a council and community is to prioritize investment in ways that perhaps hadn't been done before, because we always regarded ourselves as small and as rural, but the growth, I think, legitimately begs the question of what will this community look like in 10, 20, 30 years? And how do you retain and foster a community spirit and community cohesion with a very limited tax base, 18,000 people? It's not a lot. And because there was sort of a reliance on other urban centers, that being Ottawa or Brockville, to do what we couldn't do, we found ourselves in a situation where the community was very frustrated about a lack of investment. And I would be remiss to not mention that as we've managed the asset management landscape, we've reduced taxes each and every year because taxes were going up at the same time as growth was accelerating. And that was a frustration point too. So from my perspective, asset management is for council a way to wisely contemplate how you deploy your resources, and not just for the short term, because there was a lot of short-term thinking, and I don't think enough time and attention was spent on what will this community look like in 30 years? And if we don't invest now, what will that community be? So that's been part of, I think, our journey.
Awesome, thank you. To have a community that actually recognizes that there's been underinvestment in your existing infrastructure and making sure that that's actually part of the election conversation is, I think, is fantastic. It leads me into the maybe into the next question, and that is, you talked about some of the investments that you're making right now in your existing assets in terms of renewing the parks. What are some of the other successes that you've had using using that philosophical lens with that long-term thinking?
Yeah, well, we shook up our vehicle fleets. We retained some older vehicles, for public works. In the end, they were costing more than they were of any benefit. And again, it was a real hesitation around investment. Because public works has been very lean in our municipality. 2 decades with not a single FTE added. So we run a single shift public works crew, winter, summer, spring, fall. So there was a real reticence to kind of go beyond what had been, because everybody could make do. And we were running these vehicles that really, quite frankly, we're not serving the needs of the community or serving our public works staff. So we were able to take another look at that and say, no, we're going to invest, because these investments produce more in the long run, right? I think there was, again, I think because we're evolving as a community and our understanding of ourselves, right, is changing. And we had certainly invested in certain things like a fire hall. We knew that by virtue of how geographically widespread we are, we needed up-to-date fire equipment. So that piece had been taken care of, right? Because emergency services does a good job of really making sure that they have what they need to save people's lives. But it's some of the smaller things sometimes that I think are so crucial to kind of community spirit and community collaboration that kind of got left on the wayside. Another example is sidewalks, right? They're expensive. Again, we have an urban and rural, right, community. And in the urban core, we've seen massive changes in traffic patterns. So it's less safe for kids to walk home from school if they live in the urban core. It's less safe for seniors. And there was a real reluctance, again, to look long-term in terms of some of those investments, because it's capital intensive. Sidewalks are capital intensive. We know that. But in the end, we had to strike that balance. And, the return on investment for the quality of life and for the safety of certain roads in our community really, outweighed what was a short-term investment. And, the kind of feedback we get from that kind of longer term thinking. Those sidewalks are there for 50 years, right? They will be maintained, they will be repaired. We also put more money into sidewalk rehabilitation because our sidewalks were eroding. Our public works department was very concerned about taking away from road maintenance, right? Because there's only so much money to go around, but our sidewalks were in disrepair in many parts of our community. So once again, we stepped back and we looked at what does the community need? What will serve these assets well in the long run? And sidewalk repair is way better than having to rebuild the whole thing in 20 years. So again, it's all that short, long-term, right, thinking and trade-offs that I think have been really important. And I think this community needed council to say, we're comfortable with a reconfiguration of how we spend these resources because the benefit will outweigh a short-term cost. And that's been, I think, part of how we've been able to, I think, empower our staff, right? To make sometimes what might feel like difficult choices.
Yeah. And like you said, it's all about prioritization. And I think it's interesting because you talked about fire halls, and oftentimes emergency services stay on the agenda because they show up and they make sure they're on the agenda.
That's right.
How do we keep our pipes under the ground on the agenda, right? Who's going to be the voice for the pipes under the ground that provides, again, critical services that residents rely on every day? And so it's not just the visible investments, it is the invisible investments. So that's awesome. Thank you for speaking about that, Mayor Nancy Peckford. The other thing that I wanted to actually just let people know here, so in BC during the heat dome, there were sidewalks buckling all over the place. And this comes back to connecting, like, how is our existing infrastructure going to adapt to climate change? Who knew Vancouver, 40 degrees, that sidewalks would start buckling. So again, a different level of conversation in terms of investment. Mayor Cheryl Fort, tell us a little bit about, tell us a little bit more about what your municipality has done in terms of being successful at asset management. You talked at the beginning of really defining those services, getting clear, doing a service level review, getting clear on what services you provide and what level. What are some of the other ways that you've been successful?
Well, thank you for that. And I just love listening to both the mayors talk about what they've done in their communities. And I have to reiterate what Mayor Loosley had said about short-term thinking and really having that proper maintenance in the short term, but pushing it out into the long term. So like I had said, we did a service delivery review, and in our small community, we're just under 1,000 people. We don't have a tax base really at all. Like, we really have to manage our resources well. And we had to get beyond this thinking of Band-Aid fixes. So and I know we're going to talk about this a little bit later about those critical conversations we need to have with staff, because for our small community, it gets worrisome when we're talking, $8 million to do certain road projects to fix that water infrastructure underneath and ensure the maintenance is being done well, but also really in utilizing good technologies and best practices out there. So one of the items is every time we do a dig now in our community, we've started doing things on our own. We purchased our own excavator, and that's a huge investment when you think of a small municipality like Hornepayne. But we're really mapping everything out and trying to ensure that once that area is dug, it won't be dug again for many, many years to come. So everything that we're putting into the ground, we're trying to do it at top notch, the best practices. And further that, when we talk about what have we done as a municipality, as a council, we encourage training and training for the council, for the entire council, to get a really good understanding of what asset management means into the long term. And sometimes it's learning what are the right questions to ask. Are we asking the right questions at the table? So that's been imperative. And then supporting a training budget, and for our community, a substantial training budget for the people that are on the ground. And like Mayor Peckford had said about empowering your staff, you have to give them the tools so that they can give you the right information so that you're making good decisions. So yeah, it's been all encompassing. And like I had said, the service delivery review set us on the right foot. And I'll give you one example was our parks. Our small community had seven different areas that we were taking care of as our parks. So, and I look at that as we were spreading ourselves too thin. The service levels at each park wasn't at a high standard of excellence. So now we're looking with the community on community consultation, because best communities are built with the community members giving their input of what they want, where they live. And now we're downsizing those, and we're seeing investment. We're going after grants and putting our own funds into areas in our community where our parks will be located. And we'll probably into the future, once we finish our community improvement plan next year, I'm thinking we'll probably be down to 4 park areas. So that's a huge reduction, it would seem, but each of the park areas that are remaining are way better serviced and better maintained. And into the long term, we're going to be able to manage that better.
Oh, that's, you raise a really good point in terms of looking at your service levels and actually determining, are we overserved, but actually delivering a poor level of service? And one of the things I think that's important is to recognize that those things get eroded, right? Like those service levels get eroded over time. One of the things every time you add a garbage can, every time you add a kilometer of road, a new boulevard, then you have an expectation that you're going to provide a level of service. And if you have inadequate resources, or you haven't taken into consideration what those assets are going to cost you, then you're actually reducing the level of service without it. Like it's one of those unwitting things, right? And it just sort of happens. And so part of stewardship, like you said, is being cognizant of what are our service levels and can we maintain them over the long term. So I love that you're talking about what appears to be the divestiture of a service, which is actually improving service quality just in a more manageable way. That's fantastic. And one of the things, and Mayor Loosley actually, talked about this earlier, and that is, being a small community, the legislative environment is kind of the same, whether you're 1,000 or whether you're, 200,000. In many ways, the legislative environment and the reporting requirements for staff are the same. So investing in staff and is really key in helping them, be able to have a level of confidence to be able to share good data. And we're going to dig into what, how to have good conversations with the staff. But I wanted to turn it over to Mayor Loosley, and maybe you can just tell us a little bit about some of the successes that you are seeing in your community by using asset management principles and having that philosophical lens.
Thank you, Christina. And just before I start that, I really enjoy what I'm hearing here. But again, small town, we had to get a new ladder truck, fire truck, $1.4 million. We were blessed, at least we supply services to the township, who paid 40%. We have our own water treatment plant that's 25 kilometers away, that we pipe it and we sell water to 4 other communities. Sewage treatment plant, we just spent $23 million, but the bright side, I just want to say it's done. We're okay on those big things for years. But I do want to say, before I even came into office, it started back in 2014. So I was really blessed that the municipality had already started getting involved with asset management. And again, we knew at the time that I guess there was a lot of old things that needed attention. And the federal and provincial governments, as you know, were coming out with some additional infrastructure dollars. And the town had to get their act together. So we had some idea, not guess, oh yeah, I think this needs to be done, or I think that needs to be done. We needed backup proof. But we started, and I'm really proud of this, a basic long-term capital and financial planning model that we developed in-house. And I'm very proud of the staff and time and those that even had previous experience put into that. Our long-term planning model is integrated, was built right into our annual budgeting process in the first year of the model, and it becomes a starting point for the following year. And improved asset management has helped tremendously with us for our long and short-term financial sustainability. But we also leveraged our working relationship with our contractors, because we contract the water treatment plant out. We contract the sewage treatment plant out, and every year they have to come up with determining what their capital needs are, and we look at that. But again, it's really interesting. It's that word balance that's difficult. It's the money, and I find it really interesting with Mayor Peckford, the idea of coming in with all new people or new. It's probably a great start to educate them to get everything the way you want. But I don't think I've ever heard of a complete changeover. So I just wish you the best of luck. But anyway, that's what we're doing, Christine, and I'm quite proud of that. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you.
Can I just jump in?
Yeah.
You know, we also were facing so a water treatment plant that was close to the end of its life, $35 million. And for whatever reason, and I don't even understand. I wasn't part of the last council. We don't have anyone who would give us the benefit of understanding why the investment wasn't made. Why didn't we begin, right, to create the conditions for that investment? So what's ended up happening here is we had to bring in a sewage capacity bylaw to manage our remaining capacity. And it's happened exactly at the same time as interest in small town North Grenville, which was already very high, further accelerated. So now we have all of these conversations about to whom, right, to which developments are we assigning a remaining capacity, because we're too close to the wire, right? So again, you know, we've invested in a lot of staff here and staff training. We've refreshed our senior management team because there happened to be retirements, and we were able, again, to think to the long term. What kind of staff capacity do we need to give us the fortitude to do what, you know, Mayor Loosley is saying? He's got 22 million, and what, you're 6,000 people. We're 35 million, and we're 18,000 with high growth. So if you don't stare these major investments in the face and figure out, are you doing it or are you not? Like, because you're either on the path or you are not. And in this case, I think it's an example of an investment that came too late. And now we have staff time and council time tied up in kind of distributing a remaining capacity until we can get the new capacity. So that's an example of, you don't spend, but you pay, right? You pay.
Yeah, and that's the reality, is when you've inherited that responsibility, it doesn't do you a lot of good to point fingers backwards. You just got to figure out a way to move forward, right? And it sounds like you guys really have, and you're having the hard conversations. Like, you've inherited the hard conversations. And I love what you said. I've been studying psychology throughout through the pandemic and social behavior. And one of the Jungian principles of psychology is look where you least want to look, because that's got the information that you need. So whether it's personal or whether it's your community, it's absolutely key. So one of the things that I think is important for listeners to pick up on is all three of you have talked about the building a relationship with your staff, building staff capacity, but building the organizational culture that allows you to have difficult conversations with some challenging information that can feel overwhelming. And but as we know, there's going to be a lot of listeners that don't have that symbiotic relationship with their staff. And how do you cultivate an organizational culture that ensures that you're having the right conversations and that you're asking the right questions that you need to be asking? And so I'll just kind of open it up to whoever wants to start us off.
Well, I can definitely jump in there. The one thing I would recommend is that there's right off the hop with your councils is to ensure that you have a good understanding of a governance and administration, and understanding that divide, and really the mayor and council, because if they get too much into administration, they lose that they need to be projecting that community forward, launching the community forward. They're the vision setters, and ensuring that they have that right training, but also empowering the staff so that they have the tools in their toolbox to be able to implement the change, put the strategies in place, to have the funds to be able to do the repairs, to have that proper maintenance done on the short term so the long term is taken care of. And also looking into the long term is not under investing, because I feel the pain of talking about a water treatment plant. Our community invested heavily in a water treatment plant just over 13 years ago now, 14 years ago. So we live with the benefits of that. But when we invested, our water changed, which caused a lot of havoc on our pipes. So we've been continually upgrading and putting more investment in. That was something we didn't see happening. We couldn't foresee that. So now every time we have to do a dig and change those things out, the staff is empowered to ensure that they're putting the best product down there. But also I think on that is going back to understanding your relationship between the mayor especially and the CAO, and really having those tough conversations, because I know in our small municipality, what we found was we were way understaffed. And then you have to, with our small resources, people not understanding, residents not understanding, why are you hiring more people? And just in our short time as this council, we have been able to successfully get some good dollars into our community, into our airport, and now into our community center, our arena. So it's a substantial amount of money, but had we not hired and created a whole economic development department and hired 2 staff there, we wouldn't have been able to we wouldn't have had the staff capacity even to fill out the grant. So small municipalities really need to think a bit bigger, and that you need to spend dollars to grow, to make your infrastructure last.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, you're so right. You have to make the investment. And like you said, you need staff resources to be able to fill out the grant applications, right?
Yes, and just to add on that too, you want to have your staff feel refreshed and energized to come back to work. And if they're juggling too many things, that gets overwhelming. And we know for ourselves, we all need our downtime, our relaxed time. So it goes back to what Mayor Loosley had said about creating this balance between how we're going to manage our infrastructure, but also that the staff and everyone that's working alongside the community is balancing too, so that people come back refreshed and those ideas flow, right?
Yeah, for sure. And and it's one of the things that I want to close on a little bit later on, and that is the impact of COVID and impact on their emotional, like the emotional toll that it has taken, and the recognition. Like, I'm watching a lot of burnt out staff right now, and I think it's important to recognize that. How do we do that, making sure that we're looking after our people, right?
Can I jump in here? I really think clarity of purpose is really important, right? And I think what I observed as a resident, as a parent, I'm a mom of 3 kids, school-age kids. And so when I came into this job, after just having been a resident, no insight really, significant insight into the administration, is it wasn't clear if everyone had the same clarity of purpose. And I think staff can't be bold. They can't take risks if they feel like there isn't a clarity of purpose. So I think I applaud Mayor for your service level review. That is so brave and so ambitious. We didn't do that, but we did a council work plan in the absence of a community strategic planning process, which we're just doing now. And that created kind of values and objectives that staff could see, and they could say, oh, okay, these guys do want, we want more road safety, right? We want better serviced parks, right? Strategically where we need them. We want to grow. So that was a big piece too. So, the investment in the sewage treatment plant, which ironically has no impact on the tax base because it's all DC based, development charges based. We were signaling what we believed reflected what the community voted for. And through that clarity of purpose, I think you can energize people. Mayor Fort, we also hired a grants writer. So my philosophy is we don't leave money on the table. And if we're not successful with the first grant application, we understand why and we go back at it. We will never leave money on the table. And as a high growth, high needs municipality, we need to do that. So you were bang on. Those investments in staff, overwhelmingly pay off in spades if you make the right hires and you have clarity of purpose, which I think is so important. And sometimes, the politicians and the staff often don't think they're on the same page. And that's where things get stuck. And I think that's the gap we've been trying to close.
Yeah, that is fantastic. And that's an important distinction, because that's actually the role of elected officials. Your job is what and why, and staff's job is who and how, right? And again, it's so simple, but not to be confused with easy, because those lines get blurred. But staff's job is not to set the why or the what, that they deliver on the who and the how. And that is an important reminder, right, when it comes to the role of elected officials. Mayor Brad Loosley, I'm curious about your thoughts. How do you cultivate a culture that allows for those candid conversations that are necessary to take place?
Thank you. Yeah, that's a tough question, but I have to still really agree. The most important thing, or the key success in this factor, is having council and staff, as we've all said, work together and understanding their roles for the good of the residents. I mean, asset management has resulted in more informed council decisions in my community, and that's a good thing. And we're very supportive of our staff. And I'll give you an example in just a second. But with different options and recommendations on grants and other solutions to make this work. And just a little example is with our water treatment plant, we needed to do an $8 million upgrade. And 2 years ago, the staff came up with the idea, because we sell water to 3 other municipalities, let's get them to sign our application. And the province didn't even have enough room on the application to list the other communities. But basically, we obtained 7 of the $8 million to go towards that, because we involved other communities. My point is, staff weren't afraid to say, let's think outside the box and let's do this. I would have not thought of that, although it made sense. So, but again, it's the idea of having, as you said, the other mayors too, staff have to feel comfortable to come up with ideas and not have to feel they're going to be ridiculed or put on the spot or anything jeopardized for coming up with new ideas. So the bottom line is, you've got to have that involvement with staff, and council have got to work together. Thanks, Christina.
Thank you. And so for all of the listeners who are listening to this conversation, it is so critical what these mayors are saying. They understand the importance of setting the tone at the top and building a trusting relationship where everybody understands their roles and responsibilities. And in doing so, it fosters an environment where you can have those difficult conversations and you can dig into the information in such a way that leads to not surfacey good short-term decision-making, but real meaningful long-term decision-making that ensures that the services that we enjoy today are enjoyed by future generations. And so I want to close off with, I'd love a couple words from each of you around, what does it mean to be a good ancestor? And what I'm looking for is, what would you like to impart on those who are listening to this conversation today in terms of having that long-term view, that 7th generational thinking, because someday you're all going to be past decision makers and you don't want to be the ones that somebody else is cursing, right? You want to be the decision makers that folks will say, wow, they made tough decisions and they did the hard things and they were brave and they did what's right because they decided to be a good ancestor. So I'm curious, what I just want to open the floor. What would you like to leave our listeners with today? We'll start with Mayor Nancy Peckford. You've unmuted.
Well, I think ultimately you have to be in step with the community, right? That the alignment between staff and council has to take place because council has a mandate to deliver. And council has a mandate to deliver a quality of life or a service level, right? Or varying degrees of service levels, depending on what the community needs. So I think we've really tried as a council, and certainly I as mayor, because I happen to be parenting in the community. I'm at the arena, right? I'm at the dance studio. I'm in the grocery stores a lot, and I'm on social media a lot. And actually, from my perspective, you lose it all, right? As you can do all the best asset management in the world. If people in the community don't believe that you're really championing a quality of life that they can get beyond and for which, or get behind rather, and for which they pay good taxes. Our taxes are equivalent to Ottawa's, but what you get in Ottawa and what you get here is very different. And that is obviously compelling for enough people to be here in our community. But I think it's really important to stay connected to what the community wants and to not lose people with asset management conversations. I don't need to be an asset management poster girl. I don't, because that's not my job. That's my staff's job. My job is to make sure that where the community is signaling clear priorities in terms of investments or good fiscal conservative management, we get it right. And then asset management is a tool. And that's really where I think we can't lose our audience, right? Is we're accountable to the community. And I think communities, I have confidence in my community. I know that they understand, just like anyone else, what good asset management is. They don't have all the information, but I never regard expectations as unreasonable. And I always think good dialogue is important because people can get there pretty quickly. So
yeah, because it's so relatable, right?
It is relatable. Yeah. And people are scared of what we're scared of, right? If you don't invest in what you have, it's going to cost you more. And if you invest too much, we as a tax base won't be able to carry it. So they get those concepts. So I have a lot of faith in their capacity to be with us in this conversation.
Yeah. And you got to bring them along. And that's exactly what you're saying. So awesome. Thank you so much. Mayor Brad Loosley.
Thank you, Christina. We could talk probably for hours on some of these things, but I really think this asset management is so important to continue to stress it more and more. And I think the idea of doing what's best for your community. We're in a community that had the highest tax rate in the county. But on the bright side, we have now completed major work on facilities that are now done that the other municipalities will have to do because we had the management and the asset management saying, we're going to be in trouble if we don't, deal with these things. But it's an ongoing, as I say, balance. But I think every mayor is in the same situation. But I have to go back, and we've been really lucky with staff. We've all been lucky, the municipalities, I think, with this COVID, with the support we've got from the province and federal government. So we're lucky that way. But it's an ongoing battle. But I think it's very important to keep the community educated to understand why you're doing some of these things. But it's certainly been a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you. Excellent. Thank you. And Mayor Cheryl Fort will take us home.
I enjoyed this conversation so much. So I think when I think 7 generations away, asset management is imperative to our continual improvement, not only of our infrastructure, but of people's lives. So when I think of that life 7 generations away, I am hoping that what we do today adds to that betterment so that we don't end up like in the beginning when we were talking about what we inherited, is that the inheritance we're leaving is going to be way into the long-term future of all those people that are to come. I would like to that grandchild of mine way, way in the future, and I don't have any yet, but one day I hope to have some. But when they're looking back, that collectively, if we're all taking care of our assets and looking at climate change and the environment, we're going to create a world that's better into the future. And we've had a lot to deal with and learn from, and the mistakes we have, but we all make mistakes. Let's pick ourselves up and move into the future, taking care of what we have. And that's really looking at the environment, climate change, and ensuring that the investment dollars we're making today last for the long term. No Band-Aid fixes. So this has been a great session. I've really enjoyed meeting everyone and being here today.
Thank you. Thank you so much. This has been such a juicy, rich conversation, and you guys are all asset management rock stars, and so it's been really fun. And like Mayor Loosley said, we probably could talk about this for hours, but I'm really hoping that the listeners are going to take a lot away from this conversation and really take on that stewardship mantle. And I want to leave you with a couple thoughts today. So for those of you who are listening, having that asset management lens in your decision making means you're choosing excellence over mediocrity. It means you're choosing to tell the truth about the real cost to provide services to the public and the risk to future generations if that long-term view isn't there. It's about choosing evidence-based decisions, rational-based decisions, long-term decisions over the emotional short-term decisions. And it's choosing to be brave sometimes choosing to be brave over being popular, and choosing to communicate and have a dialogue with the community about the challenges that you've inherited and the opportunities that exist for your community. So I want to thank all three of you, and thank you to all the listeners that have been listening in on this conversation. We hope that you're more curious than ever about how you can do the best job that you could do for your community. So thank you.
Thanks to the other mayors. This has been fabulous.
Thank you, everyone.
And thank you, Moderator Benty. Thank you.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Take care.
Bye, everyone. Enjoy your day.